The day a billionaire fired everyone except me, I thought it was the worst day of my life. I had no idea it was the beginning of every secret people had spent years trying to bury. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Blackwood Manor as I polished the last crystal vase in the east hallway. Outside, gray clouds stretched across the Connecticut sky, turning the afternoon into something that felt closer to evening. The mansion was quiet, but not peaceful. There was a tension in the air, the kind that made people lower their voices without knowing why. My name is Grace Parker, and at 26 years old, I worked as a maid in one of the largest private estates in New England. Every morning, I woke up at 5:30, drove 42 miles from my small apartment, and spent 10 hours cleaning rooms I could never afford to live in. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most days, I was invisible. And honestly, that was how I liked it. Wealthy people often looked through people like me. We were part of the furniture. We appeared when they needed something and disappeared when they didn't. Especially when that wealthy person was Ethan Blackwood. Even if you had never met him, you probably knew his name. His company owned hotels, tech firms, real estate developments, and enough investments to make financial news every week. People called him a genius. Others called him cold. From what I had seen during the 8 months I worked at his estate, both descriptions were true. He rarely smiled. Rarely spoke. And never noticed me. Until that afternoon. It started with a phone call. Then another. Then another. Within 30 minutes, managers were rushing through hallways, assistants were carrying boxes, and security guards were escorting employees toward the front gate. Confused whispers spread through the mansion. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody except Ethan Blackwood. I was dusting bookshelves in the library when Mrs. Whitaker, the head housekeeper, hurried inside. Her face had lost all color. "Grace," she said quietly. "Come with me." My stomach dropped. People only used that tone when something terrible had happened. We walked through 3 hallways and into the grand ballroom. Nearly every employee stood there. Chefs. Drivers. Gardeners. Assistants. Housekeepers. More than 40 people. Ethan Blackwood stood near the fireplace wearing a charcoal suit. His hands rested calmly in his pockets while everyone else looked terrified. The room fell silent the moment he looked up. His blue eyes swept across the crowd. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice low and controlled, "your employment with Blackwood Manor has been terminated." Gasps echoed around the room. Some people looked shocked. Others looked angry. A few looked close to tears. I felt my own heart pounding against my ribs. Nobody understood. Why would he fire everyone? The mansion couldn't function without staff. Questions exploded around the room, but Ethan ignored them. One by one, employees were directed toward the exit. Within minutes, the ballroom began to empty. I stood frozen beside Mrs. Whitaker, trying to process what was happening. Then something strange occurred. Ethan looked directly at me. Not through me. At me. For the first time since I had started working there. His expression didn't change. "Grace Parker," he said. My name sounded unfamiliar coming from him. "You stay." The room went silent again. Every head turned toward me. I felt dozens of eyes staring. Confusion. Curiosity. Jealousy. None of it made sense. Why me? Out of everyone in the mansion, why was I the only one being kept? Ethan held my gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Because you're the only person here I trust." I did not know what frightened me more, being fired along with everyone else or being the only one left behind. The ballroom slowly emptied until the massive room felt far too large for the 3 people remaining. Ethan Blackwood. Mrs. Whitaker. And me. The crackling fireplace filled the silence while rain traced slow paths down the towering windows. Mrs. Whitaker looked as confused as I felt. Sir, she finally said, carefully choosing her words, there must be some mistake. Ethan did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on me as though he were trying to solve a puzzle nobody else could see. Then he nodded once. There is no mistake. His voice was calm. Too calm. You may leave, Mrs. Whitaker. The older woman hesitated before gathering her purse. As she walked past me, she squeezed my hand. Call me if you need anything, she whispered. A minute later, she was gone. The front doors closed somewhere in the distance. Suddenly, the mansion felt empty. Unnaturally empty. I stood alone with one of the richest men in America. I do not understand, I admitted. My voice sounded small inside the enormous room. Ethan turned toward the fireplace. Most people here were hired through recommendations. And most people have loyalties that can be bought. I frowned. You think your entire staff was dishonest? I think trust is expensive. His answer only created more questions. He walked across the ballroom and stopped beside a grand piano. Rainlight reflected across the polished black surface. You have worked here 8 months, he said. In that time you have never asked me for a favor. Never asked for money. Never tried to get closer to people with influence. I blinked. I am a maid. Exactly. Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. Like he was not talking about cleaning at all. His eyes moved briefly to the silver chain around my neck. A simple necklace I had worn for years. It was not valuable. Just a small oval locket I had owned since childhood. His expression changed for the briefest moment. Not surprise. Not recognition. Something deeper. Something he hid almost immediately. Where did you get that necklace? He asked. The question caught me off guard. My fingers instinctively touched the locket. I have had it as long as I can remember. Who gave it to you? I do not know. The answer sounded strange even to me. I was adopted when I was 6. It was one of the few things I already had. Ethan stared at the necklace for several seconds. The room felt colder somehow. Then he looked away. Interesting. That single word settled heavily between us. Before I could ask why he cared, a sharp chime echoed through the mansion. Ethan pulled a phone from his pocket and glanced at the screen. For the first time, I saw tension break through his controlled exterior. He read something silently. His jaw tightened. What happened? I asked before thinking. He looked toward the dark windows. Someone entered this house looking for something. My stomach tightened. Something? His eyes returned to the locket resting against my collarbone. Or someone. I could not tell whether the chill running down my spine came from Ethan's words or the storm outside. Someone was looking for me. It sounded ridiculous. I was nobody. A maid with an old sedan, a tiny apartment, and overdue student loans. Nobody searched for people like me. Yet Ethan Blackwood did not look like a man making wild guesses. He looked like a man who had already connected pieces of a puzzle I could not even see. The grandfather clock near the ballroom entrance struck 6. The sound echoed through the empty mansion. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket and started walking toward the main hallway. Come with me, he said. Where? Somewhere safer. My feet remained planted. You still have not explained anything. He stopped. For a moment, I thought he might ignore the question. Instead, he turned toward me. 3 weeks ago, someone gained access to records connected to this estate. What kind of records? Old records. His gaze drifted briefly toward my necklace again. Much older than the company. None of this made sense. And that has something to do with me? I do not know yet. The honesty surprised me. Ethan seemed like the type of man who always knew everything. Admitting uncertainty looked uncomfortable on him. We walked through a series of quiet hallways. Without the staff, the mansion felt enormous. Empty rooms stretched behind closed doors. Chandeliers reflected soft golden light across marble floors. Every sound seemed louder than normal. My footsteps. The rain. My heartbeat. Ethan led me into a smaller sitting room near the west wing. A fire burned quietly inside a stone fireplace. On a nearby table sat a tray with untouched coffee and documents arranged in perfect stacks. "Sit," he said. I lowered myself onto a leather chair. Ethan remained standing. He opened one of the folders and studied several pages before speaking again. "Tell me about your adoption." I laughed nervously. "That is a strange question. Humor me." I stared into the fire. "There is not much to tell. My adoptive parents lived in Vermont. They were good people. They said I entered the system when I was 6 years old. No relatives? None that anyone could find. Original birth certificate? Missing." His expression darkened slightly. "Medical records? Almost nothing before age 6. The room fell silent. Suddenly, details I had never questioned seemed strange. Missing records. Missing history. Missing answers. "You think that means something?" I asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. He reached into the folder and removed an old photograph. The edges were worn. The colors faded by time. He placed it carefully on the table between us. My breath caught. The picture showed a woman standing beside a lake. She wore a pale blue coat and smiled directly at the camera. Around her neck hung a necklace. The exact same necklace resting against my collarbone. My fingers tightened around the locket. "Who is she?" I whispered. Ethan looked at the photograph for a long moment before meeting my eyes. For the first time since I had known him, his composure seemed to crack. "My mother." For several seconds, I could not speak. The fire crackled softly between us while I stared at the photograph. The woman in the picture looked warm. Kind. The kind of person who remembered birthdays and sent handwritten notes. She also wore the exact same necklace I had worn nearly every day of my life. My fingers tightened around the locket hanging against my chest. "That is impossible," I whispered. Ethan remained standing beside the table. I thought so too. I looked back at the photograph. The similarity was undeniable. The same silver chain. The same oval shape. Even the tiny scratch near the clasp appeared identical. "Maybe there were 2 of them," I said. "Maybe it was a gift set or something." Even as I spoke, the explanation sounded weak. Ethan slowly shook his head. "The necklace was custom made." My stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "Because my father commissioned it." Rain tapped against the windows. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Then how did I get it?" I asked. Ethan's expression darkened. "That is exactly what I intend to find out." He moved toward a bookshelf and removed another folder. Unlike the first one, this file looked older. The edges were yellowed with age. He opened it carefully. Inside were copies of newspaper clippings, legal documents, and photographs. Most appeared to be more than 20 years old. "My mother died when I was 12, he said quietly. After that, my father spent years collecting information about her personal projects." "Projects?" Ethan nodded. "Charities. Community programs. Family outreach foundations." He slid one photograph across the table. My eyes widened. The image showed his mother standing beside several children outside a small brick building. A community center, maybe. Everyone was smiling. Everyone except one little girl standing near the edge of the picture. The child looked nervous. Almost frightened. My pulse quickened. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. A silver necklace around her neck. I stopped breathing for a second. "That looks like me." Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. We both saw it. The date stamped on the photograph read 18 years earlier. My hands began to shake. No, I looked closer. That cannot be me. But the longer I stared, the harder it became to deny. The shape of the face. The eyes. Even the small birthmark near the left eyebrow. It was there. The same mark I saw in the mirror every morning. Who took this picture? I asked. We do not know. Ethan sat down across from me for the first time that evening. The photograph was found among my mother's personal files after she died. Why did nobody tell me about this? Because nobody knew you existed. The words hung heavily in the air. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills surrounding the estate. Then Ethan's phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen. Whatever he read immediately changed his expression. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. What is it? I asked. He slowly lowered the phone. Someone just accessed sealed adoption records from 20 years ago. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Mine? Ethan met my eyes. Yes. The words hit me harder than I expected. Someone had accessed my adoption records. Not searched for a name similar to mine. Not reviewed random files. Mine. The room felt strangely unsteady, as though the floor beneath the mansion had shifted a few inches. I stared at Ethan, hoping he would tell me this was all some misunderstanding. Instead, he stood and walked toward the window. The storm had grown heavier. Rain streaked across the glass while distant lights shimmered through the darkness beyond the estate grounds. How is that even possible? I asked. Those records should be protected. They are, Ethan said. Which is why this concerns me. His phone rested in his hand. Whatever system he used clearly monitored things most people never thought about. I wrapped my arms around myself. Maybe someone is researching adoption cases. Even I did not believe it. Ethan turned toward me. The access occurred 42 minutes ago. So? 42 minutes ago was shortly before I fired the staff. A chill crawled up my spine. You think someone here was involved? I think someone knew something. The fire crackled softly. For the first time all evening, fear began replacing confusion. Not fear of Ethan. Fear of whatever invisible story seemed to be following me. I had spent 26 years believing my life was ordinary. Suddenly every missing record and unanswered question felt important. Ethan returned to the table and opened another folder. This one contained copies of employee files. Names. Dates. Background checks. Notes. What are you looking for? I asked. Patterns. And have you found any? He was silent for several seconds. Possibly. Before I could ask another question, a knock echoed from the doorway. Both of us looked up. A woman stepped inside. She was elegant, perfectly dressed, and looked as though she belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine. Dark blonde hair framed a striking face. Diamond earrings caught the firelight. Her eyes immediately found Ethan. Then they found me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. There you are, she said smoothly. I have been calling. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Victoria. She walked closer. Every movement appeared carefully controlled. Your assistant said you dismissed everyone. Her gaze drifted toward me. Except her. I suddenly felt underdressed in my housekeeping uniform. Victoria smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. Interesting choice. Ethan closed the folder. What do you need? To know why my fiancé is spending his evening alone with a maid while the entire household is being escorted off the property. My stomach tightened. Fiancé. Nobody had ever mentioned a fiancé. Ethan's face revealed nothing. This is not the time. Victoria folded her arms. Then perhaps you should explain why her name keeps appearing in conversations that suddenly stop when I enter the room. Silence filled the space. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied me. Then something unexpected happened. Her gaze landed on my necklace. For the briefest second, her confident expression disappeared. Shock flashed across her face. Real shock. She recovered quickly. Almost too quickly. But I had seen it. And judging by the way Ethan's eyes narrowed, he had seen it too. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm outside. Victoria's reaction had lasted less than a second, but it was enough. I had seen it. Ethan had seen it. And judging by the way she quickly reached for her handbag and looked away, she knew we had noticed. Is something wrong? Ethan asked. His voice remained calm, but I was beginning to learn that calm often meant he was paying closer attention than anyone else. Victoria smiled too quickly. Of course not. Her eyes returned to my necklace. It is just an unusual piece. I touched the locket instinctively. I have had it since I was a child. Something flickered across her face again. Not surprise this time. Concern. Real concern. Ethan stepped closer to the fireplace. You recognize it? Victoria laughed softly. Should I? Neither of them broke eye contact. The conversation felt less like people speaking and more like chess players moving pieces across a board. Finally, Victoria looked toward me. How long have you worked here? 8 months. And before that? I lived in Hartford. Family? The question felt innocent enough, but something about her tone made me cautious. My adoptive parents passed away several years ago. Victoria nodded slowly. That must have been difficult. Before I could answer, Ethan closed the folder on the table. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Grace has had a long day. Victoria's smile tightened. I am sure she has. Another uncomfortable silence followed. Then Ethan's phone vibrated once more. He glanced at the screen. Whatever message appeared immediately changed the atmosphere. His eyes sharpened. Victoria noticed. What happened? She asked. Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he looked directly at me. The records team found something. My pulse quickened. About the adoption? He nodded. A missing file. Victoria froze. It happened so quickly that most people would have missed it. But after the evening I had experienced, I noticed everything. Missing? I asked. Ethan opened the message and read silently for several seconds. There were originally 6 documents attached to your case. And? Only 5 remained in the archive. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. What was in the 6th file? Nobody knows. Rain battered the windows harder than before. Somewhere in the mansion, an old pipe groaned. The entire estate seemed to hold its breath. Victoria looked toward the doorway. I should probably let you work. Ethan studied her carefully. You are leaving already? I have an early meeting in New York. She picked up her purse. Good night, Ethan. Then she looked at me one final time. Her smile returned, polished and perfect. Good night, Grace. After she disappeared into the hallway, neither Ethan nor I spoke for several seconds. Finally, I turned toward him. She knows something. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the empty doorway. I believe so. About me? Possibly. He walked toward a cabinet near the far wall and entered a security code. A hidden compartment opened. Inside sat several old journals. Leather-bound. Carefully preserved. He removed one and placed it on the table between us. Dust floated through the firelight. What is that? I asked. Ethan ran his fingers across the cover. His expression softened in a way I had never seen before. My mother's diary. My heart skipped a beat. Slowly, he opened the journal. Most of the pages contained handwritten notes, dates, personal reflections, lists. Then he stopped turning pages. I leaned forward. Written across the top of the page in faded blue ink were 4 words that made my entire body go still. Protect the little girl. The words seemed to echo through the room long after I read them. Protect the little girl. My eyes remained fixed on the page while the fire cast flickering shadows across the journal. The handwriting was elegant and careful, the kind that belonged to someone who chose every word with purpose. Ethan turned the page slowly. Neither of us spoke. The next entry was dated almost 19 years earlier. I watched his eyes move across the lines. Then his expression changed. What is it? I asked. He hesitated. My mother wrote that the child was frightened. My throat tightened. The child? Ethan nodded. She never used a name. He continued reading silently. Rain tapped against the windows while the old grandfather clock somewhere down the hall marked another passing minute. Finally, he slid the journal toward me. Read this. My hands trembled slightly as I looked down at the faded ink. The entry was short. The little girl refuses to remove the necklace. She says her mother told her never to lose it. She does not understand why people are asking questions. She only wants to go home. I stopped reading. My chest felt strangely heavy. Home. The word stirred something deep inside me. Not a memory exactly. More like an emotion buried beneath years of forgotten time. I do not remember any of this, I whispered. Ethan sat back in his chair. You were very young. But why would your mother be writing about me? That is what we need to find out. Another page followed. Then another. Most mentioned meetings, phone calls, and arrangements. The details were vague. Almost deliberately vague. As though someone expected the journal might one day be read by the wrong person. Then Ethan suddenly froze. His finger stopped halfway down the page. What? I asked. He slowly turned the journal toward me. A name appeared in the margin. Not mine. Victoria Hale. The room went silent. My pulse quickened immediately. Victoria? Ethan read the passage again. His jaw tightened. The date is 20 years old. That is impossible. Victoria looked barely 30. Ethan nodded. This cannot be the same person. Yet neither of us sounded convinced. He stood and walked toward the fireplace. For the first time since I had met him, he looked unsettled. Not confused. Unsettled. What are you thinking? I asked quietly. He stared into the flames. I am thinking that every answer creates 2 more questions. His phone vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. Blackwood. He listened without speaking. As the seconds passed, the color slowly drained from his face. My stomach dropped. Whatever he was hearing was not good. Are you certain? He asked. Silence. Then he closed his eyes briefly. Do not let anyone access it. I am coming myself. The call ended. Ethan lowered the phone. What happened? I asked. He looked directly at me. The missing adoption file was not destroyed. Hope surged through me. They found it? Ethan's expression remained grim. No, he paused. Someone checked it out from the archive yesterday. Yesterday. The word echoed through my mind like a bell. Someone had checked out the missing file yesterday. Not 20 years ago. Not last month. Yesterday. Every instinct told me that was not a coincidence. Ethan was already moving. He closed the journal, slipped his phone into his pocket, and headed for the door. We are leaving. I stood quickly. Now? Now. The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. Within minutes we were walking through the silent mansion. The empty hallways felt different than they had earlier. Less like a home. More like a place hiding secrets inside its walls. Rain continued falling outside as we stepped into the underground garage. A black sedan waited near the elevator. Ethan opened the passenger door for me without a word. I climbed inside. The drive began in silence. Headlights cut through sheets of rain while windshield wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm. Connecticut roads blurred past the windows. For nearly 20 minutes neither of us spoke. Finally I broke the silence. Do you think whoever took the file knows who I am? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. I think someone has known for a very long time. His answer sent another chill through me. Then why wait until now? That is the question. The city lights appeared ahead as we approached Hartford. The archive building sat near an older section of downtown, surrounded by brick offices and government buildings. By the time we arrived, the rain had weakened to a light drizzle. Ethan parked directly in front. The building looked ordinary. 3 stories tall. Stone columns. Dark windows. Nothing about it suggested the answers to my life might be hidden inside. A security guard met us at the entrance. He recognized Ethan immediately. Mr. Blackwood. Show me the file request log. We followed him through a maze of hallways until we reached a records room. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Metal shelves stretched in every direction. The guard handed Ethan a tablet. Ethan scanned the screen. His expression remained unreadable. Then he stopped. What is it? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. A visitor record appeared. Date. Time. Authorization code. Everything looked normal except for one line. Requested by V. Hale. My stomach dropped. Victoria. Ethan said nothing. He did not need to. We both knew exactly what we were looking at. The same Victoria whose name appeared in his mother's diary. The same Victoria who reacted when she saw my necklace. The same Victoria who happened to be his fiancée. My thoughts spun so fast I could barely keep up. That cannot be possible, I whispered. She would have been a child back then. Ethan stared at the screen. Unless the diary was referring to someone else. Or unless there is something about Victoria we do not know. The guard suddenly cleared his throat. There is one more thing. Ethan looked up. What? The guard hesitated. The file was returned this morning. Hope surged through me. Then where is it? The guard's face paled slightly. That is the problem. He swallowed hard. The folder came back empty. Empty. The folder had been returned empty. I stared at the security guard, certain I had misunderstood him. Records did not simply disappear. Not files connected to government archives. Not documents protected for decades. Yet the look on his face told me he was telling the truth. Ethan reached for the folder. His movements remained controlled, but I could see tension building behind his eyes. The folder itself looked ordinary. A faded label. A case number. My name. Grace Parker. Or at least the name I had lived with for most of my life. He opened it carefully. Nothing. No birth records. No placement reports. No medical information. Just an empty shell. Like someone had removed an entire history and left the cover behind. Who had access after it was returned? Ethan asked. The guard shook his head. Nobody. Security footage? Already being reviewed. Ethan closed the folder. I want a copy. Of course. The guard hurried away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The archive room suddenly felt colder than before. Endless shelves stretched into the distance beneath fluorescent lights. Thousands of stories. Thousands of lives. And somehow mine was the one somebody had tried to erase. Why would Victoria take it? I asked quietly. Ethan looked at the empty folder. Because she knew what was inside. Or because she did not want anyone else to know. He nodded once. We left the archive an hour later carrying copies of every record connected to the request. The rain had finally stopped. Moisture shimmered on the sidewalks beneath streetlights. Hartford looked peaceful. Normal. Meanwhile, my entire world felt as though it had been turned upside down in less than 24 hours. During the drive back, Ethan remained unusually quiet. His focus never left the road. I stared out the passenger window watching lights blur past. Every few minutes I touched the necklace around my neck, almost expecting it to disappear. Eventually I broke the silence. Did you love her? Ethan glanced toward me. Who? Victoria. He looked forward again. The answer took longer than I expected. I cared about her. Something about the wording caught my attention. Not love. Cared. Past tense. Before I could ask anything else, his phone rang through the car speakers. A man's voice filled the cabin. Mr. Blackwood, I found something. Ethan immediately straightened. Go ahead. The photograph from your mother's files. My pulse quickened. What about it? Ethan asked. We enhanced the background. Silence followed. Then the man continued. There was someone else standing behind the children. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter. Who? We identified her from public records. Another pause. I could hear papers moving on the other end of the line. Then the answer came. Victoria's mother. The car seemed to go silent. Every sound disappeared except my heartbeat. Ethan slowly lowered the volume. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally he looked toward me. His expression was no longer confused. It was the expression of a man who had just connected pieces that should never have fit together. Grace, he said quietly, I do not think Victoria entered your life by accident. The drive back to Blackwood Manor felt longer than the trip to Hartford. Ethan's words repeated in my mind over and over. I do not think Victoria entered your life by accident. The statement sounded impossible. Before taking this job, I had never met Ethan. I had never met Victoria. I had answered an employment listing online like thousands of other people searching for work. Yet the deeper we dug into the past, the harder coincidence became to believe. By the time we reached the estate, the clouds had begun to break apart. Moonlight spilled across the wet stone driveway, turning puddles into mirrors. The mansion stood silent against the night sky. For the first time since arriving 8 months earlier, it no longer felt familiar. It felt like a place built on secrets. We entered through the west entrance. The empty hallways echoed with every step. No staff. No voices. Just the distant hum of climate systems and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Ethan stopped near the grand staircase. You should get some rest. I laughed softly. After tonight? A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth before disappearing almost immediately. Fair point. I followed him into a smaller sitting room overlooking the gardens. Neither of us seemed ready to sleep. He poured coffee while I stood near the window. The storm had washed the grounds clean. Everything looked calm. Too calm. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. Why did you really keep me here? Ethan stared into his coffee cup. The answer did not come right away. At first, because of the necklace. He looked up. Then because of the photograph. And now? His eyes met mine. Now because I think you deserve answers. Something shifted inside me. Not because of the words themselves. Because he meant them. For the first time in my life, someone with the power to walk away had chosen to stay. Before I could respond, a notification appeared on Ethan's phone. He glanced down. The color drained from his face. My stomach tightened instantly. What happened? Ethan stood so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. Someone entered the east wing. I frowned. There is nobody else here. Exactly. He pulled up a security feed. We both stared at the screen. A camera overlooking an old hallway displayed a figure moving through the mansion. The image was grainy. Dark. Difficult to identify. But one detail was unmistakable. The person was heading toward the private family archives. Ethan immediately switched to another camera. Then another. The figure disappeared. Gone. As though they knew exactly where the blind spots were located. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Who is that? I whispered. Ethan zoomed in on the final frame. The image sharpened slightly. Just enough to reveal the outline of a familiar coat. A coat I had seen earlier that evening. Ethan's jaw tightened. Victoria. For a moment I could not breathe. Victoria. The name hung in the air between us while the frozen image remained on the screen. Ethan stared at it without blinking. The woman he had planned to marry had just been caught entering a restricted section of the mansion in the middle of the night after accessing my missing adoption records. None of it felt real. Maybe there is another explanation, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Ethan did not answer. He enlarged the image again. The coat. The height. The posture. Every detail pointed to the same conclusion. She was supposed to be in New York, he said quietly. That is what she told us. My stomach tightened. What are you going to do? Ethan locked the screen and slipped the phone into his pocket. Find out what she was looking for. We crossed the mansion quickly. The east wing felt colder than the rest of the house. Family portraits lined the walls. Generations of Blackwoods watched from gilded frames as we moved through the corridor. At the end stood a heavy oak door leading to the private archives. Ethan entered a security code. The lock clicked open. The room beyond smelled faintly of old paper and cedar wood. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Boxes. Journals. Legal files. Decades of family history carefully preserved. Nothing appeared disturbed. At least not at first glance. Ethan moved directly toward a cabinet near the back wall. He opened a drawer and stopped. What is it? I asked. He pulled out a folder. Unlike the others, this one sat slightly crooked. As though someone had returned it in a hurry. Ethan placed it on a table beneath a reading lamp. The label read Family Trust Records. Inside were legal documents. Property records. Correspondence. Then a single folded letter slipped onto the table. Ethan unfolded it carefully. The paper looked old. Very old. His eyes moved across the page. The color slowly drained from his face. Ethan? He handed me the letter. My pulse raced as I began reading. Most of it contained legal language I barely understood. Then I reached the final paragraph. The words made my hands tremble. In the event that the child cannot be located, all assets shall remain under temporary stewardship until her identity is confirmed. Child. Identity. Assets. I looked up. Who is this talking about? Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. You. The room spun. That is impossible. I do not think it is. He pointed toward a line near the bottom of the page. I followed his finger. Attached to the document was a reference number. The same reference number printed on the empty adoption folder from Hartford. My heart hammered against my ribs. You are saying this was connected to my adoption? Ethan nodded. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he looked toward another page tucked beneath the letter. His expression hardened instantly. Grace. What? He slowly turned the page around. At the bottom sat a recent signature. Not 20 years old. Not faded by time. Recent. fresh. The signature belonged to Victoria Hale. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The signature sat at the bottom of the page like a final piece falling into place. Victoria Hale. Not hidden. Not disguised. Her name was right there beneath documents connected to my adoption, my missing records, and a trust that apparently existed because of me. My hands trembled as I looked up at Ethan. She knew. The words barely escaped my lips. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the signature. Yes, he finally said. She knew. The realization settled over the room like a storm cloud. All the strange moments suddenly made sense. Her reaction to the necklace. The adoption records. The archive visit. The security footage. None of it had been random. Someone had spent years protecting information. Someone else had spent years hiding it. I sank into a chair. The room felt smaller than before. Why? I whispered. Why would anyone do this? Ethan walked slowly toward another cabinet. Because whatever is in these records matters. He opened a locked drawer and removed a thin folder marked confidential. Inside was a collection of legal correspondence dating back nearly 2 decades. Most of it referenced trusts, guardianships, and protected beneficiaries. Then Ethan found a letter clipped to the back. His expression changed immediately. What? I asked. He handed it to me. The letter came from a law firm. It was addressed to his mother. My eyes scanned the page. Halfway down, I found the sentence that changed everything. The child remains the sole beneficiary named in the original family trust. My pulse thundered in my ears. Sole beneficiary. Ethan, he nodded slowly. Keep reading. I continued. The trust included properties, investments, and assets placed under protection until the child reached adulthood and her identity could be verified. The number attached to those assets made my breath catch. It was not millions. It was far more than that. I lowered the paper. This cannot be real. I think it is. My mind struggled to process the information. I had spent years worrying about rent payments, student loans, and grocery budgets. Meanwhile, a trust connected to my identity had apparently existed all along. Then why was it hidden? I asked. Ethan looked toward the old journals stacked on the table. Because somebody benefited from keeping you invisible. Silence filled the archive room. Then another realization hit me. Victoria. Ethan's jaw tightened. Or someone connected to her. He reached for one final document tucked into the folder. A birth record. Not mine. Victoria's. His eyes narrowed as he examined it. Grace. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. What? Ethan placed the document beside the photograph we had found earlier. Side by side. Date against date. Name against name. Then he pointed toward a line listing Victoria's mother. My heart nearly stopped. The name matched the woman standing behind me in the photograph from 20 years ago. The same woman who appeared in his mother's records. The same woman connected to the trust. Ethan slowly looked up. I think we finally know who started all of this. The sun rose over Blackwood Manor a few hours later, casting pale gold light through the archive windows. I had not slept. Neither had Ethan. We spent the remainder of the night reading documents, comparing dates, and piecing together a story that should have been uncovered years ago. By morning, the truth was impossible to ignore. Victoria's mother had been assigned to oversee portions of the trust after the little girl disappeared from official records. Over time, temporary stewardship had quietly become control. Then control had become secrecy. The missing file. The altered records. The years of silence. Everything pointed back to the same decision made decades earlier. Someone had chosen convenience over truth. Someone had decided that a forgotten child would never return. Ethan stood beside the window, holding one final letter from his mother's journal collection. It was the last entry she ever wrote about the little girl. I watched him read it twice before handing it to me. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. If she ever comes back, tell her she was never forgotten. Tell her she mattered. My vision blurred. For most of my life, I had believed I came from nowhere. No history. No answers. No one searching for me. Yet a woman I never met had spent years trying to protect a future she hoped I would someday reclaim. A knock interrupted the silence. One of Ethan's attorneys entered carrying several folders. By noon, the remaining records had been verified. By afternoon, every legal question had been answered. The trust was real. My identity was confirmed. The missing pieces had finally been restored. Yet what surprised me most was how little the money mattered. After everything that had happened, the numbers felt insignificant compared to something far more valuable. The truth. I walked outside shortly before sunset. The storm had completely passed. Fresh air filled the gardens. Water droplets sparkled on roses lining the stone pathways. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Ethan found me near the fountain where his mother used to sit according to the journals. Neither of us spoke immediately. We simply watched the fading sunlight paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Finally, he broke the silence. What happens now? I smiled softly. For the first time in my life, I get to decide that myself. He laughed quietly. The sound felt rare. Genuine. That sounds like something my mother would have said. We stood there as evening settled across the estate. The mansion behind us looked different now. Not because it had changed. Because I had. The frightened girl from the photograph no longer existed. The maid who thought she was invisible no longer existed either. In their place stood someone who finally knew where she came from. Someone who finally knew her story. As the last light disappeared beyond the trees, my fingers brushed the silver necklace resting against my collarbone. The necklace had carried a mystery for nearly 2 decades. Now it carried something else. Proof. Not of wealth. Not of status. But of a simple truth that survived every missing file, every secret, and every lie. The truth always waits. And when it finally finds its voice, it changes everything.